I don't need wax and other tricks of the trade to have people call out my mustache like that. That's it's a wild look, and it's awesome in its own right, but it's a try hard look, and that's not what I go for.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Monkey Knife Fight College Football Show. I'm Dan Watkins. Joining me, as always, is the great John McKechnie from Rotowire.com. John, I was going to, start off this week with no top 25 matchups. I was going to ask you who your upset special is right off the top here, but we've already had some Wednesday night Fun Belt action with Appalachian State coming through, pulling off the upset over Coastal Carolina. So I guess I'll just ask you, any opening thoughts here heading into week 8?
Yeah, it's definitely a funky slate, and if last night's any indication, we could get some chaos coming. And we had some chaos last weekend with Iowa going down. We previously talked about how they had this cakewalk the rest of the way, and then they blow it against Purdue. So yeah, last night, Boone, The Rock, it was electric. A lot of fun, no context college football tweets out there from just like, there was a guy in like the marshmallow, like EDM guy helmet going on. I mean, yeah, it was just a good time out there.
Yeah, they were making a big deal of it, and I guess that was Appalachian's first top 25 win since the win at the Big House all those years ago, which I can't believe, by the way, that was 14 years ago now. I remember that was like Labor Day. I think I was in high school, like just laying on the couch waiting for school to start and watching that happening. And now look, boom, 14 years later, Appalachian State back in the news. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I was a caddy that summer, and I was like waiting in the caddy shack, and like all these like old people with money on the Michigan game were flipping out about that. So I was like, this is interesting.
I can imagine. I can absolutely imagine.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, they stole my rounds after that.
But as I mentioned off the top of the show here, this is the first week of the season with no top 25 matchups. There's still plenty of exciting DFS plays this week. We're going to break them all down for you, as we always do. So, John, before we get into that, though, I noticed on your Twitter feed that John's tailgate was actually at a tailgate. How was that? How was the Georgia-Kentucky game? And what was the food and drink of choice at John's tailgate?
Let's see here. So, yes, I did go over to Athens last weekend, stayed with a buddy who lives in the area, and a bunch of us got a tailgate spot and posted up there for a couple hours before the game. Just good friends of mine hanging out, your classic tailgate scene, and we're really close to our gate from the stadium. So that was really nice, and it was just a blast. I don't know if there was so much food being had, but plenty of white canned suds was also being consumed, and I did as per game day tradition though. When I go to a game, or if I'm in Athens, Saturday morning Chick-fil-A is not just like a necessity, but like a double necessity. Like gotta absolutely have it to get you in the mood for college football Saturday. So did have some Chick-fil-A to lay the foundation, lay the base.
That's a great base. I mean, I don't think you can get a much better base than that for a full day of college football and some light canned beverages, as you were saying. Anyways, this is a bit of a weird week this week, so I figured we'd get a little weird on the show and we'd kind of build some slates here. And let's just go. We'll go right by kind of block by block. We'll start off with some early games on Saturday. The noon Eastern time kickoffs. We got a nice little 3x3 here. It's a 4 times your buy-in multiplier. And let's start off right with the guy, the man of the hour, Caleb Williams in Oklahoma, starting to look like that Sooners team we all know and love for fantasy purposes, with Caleb Williams under center. They take on the Jayhawks in Kansas this week. His more or less 234.5. He, of course, had 211 versus Texas 2 weeks ago in about 3 quarters. It was like 2.5, something like that. And then last week had 295 yards through the air on TCU. He did quite a bit with his legs as well, but he completed 18 of 23 passes. And if you want to get an idea of how bad this Kansas team he's going up against, they lost to Texas Tech 41-14. Texas Tech gave up 70 points to Texas. So any concerns here with Oklahoma just getting way too big of a lead and just kind of bringing in the backups? Maybe we see Spencer Rattler this weekend.
I think because Oklahoma was so shaky to start the year, and so many people were starting to jump out on them, myself included. this feels like a good style points week, I think, for Oklahoma. And I think that, they still probably won't even need to ask Caleb Williams to throw all that much. But as we saw last week, throwing for almost 300 yards on just 23 attempts against TCU, that goes to show the kind of firepower that he brings to this offense. And Kansas just really doesn't seem to stand a chance. And that's obviously reflected in the spread here. And I think it's going to be reflected in the box score when it comes to Caleb Williams this week. I mean, the Jayhawks are giving up a ton through the air, and I don't think that there's really anyone in that secondary that can slow down these Oklahoma receivers. They're really deep, even if they're not as maybe star-studded as we've seen in recent years. And Caleb Williams, of course, a graduate of my high school. So, I mean, I got to go with the more on Mr. Williams.
And I was watching, so during that Appalachian State Coastal Carolina game at halftime, the analysts, they're kind of doing their thing. And then I heard the host there, I'm not sure who it was, but he teased like Caleb Williams for Heisman. Like I'm starting to buy in on it, and it's been 6 quarters, man. Let's calm down a little bit before we give the kid the freaking Heisman trophy here. And let's see Oklahoma, if they can get those style points you were talking about. But one number that I do really like for Caleb Williams this week, especially with the way he runs the football, is his fantasy total here on MKF. It's 26.5. I think he could go over that pretty easily in this one.
Really, really like that call. Yeah, the added dual threat capability that he has. We saw it against Texas. We've seen it pretty much every time he's come into the game. He's got that athleticism to where when he tucks it and runs, good luck stopping him. He's really just kind of a tank out there, in addition to a guy who can really shred you through the air.
Moving on here, for the first time in 14 years, Purdue enters a game as a ranked team. Congratulations to the Boilermakers, who are having a great season so far. And a reason for that, the play of Aiden O'Connell, especially the past 2 weeks. He's gone over 370 yards in the air in each of those 2 games against Minnesota. And then last week when they went into Iowa and shocked the Hawkeyes with that 24-7 win. So last week he shreds Iowa, but turnovers are a bit of an issue with this guy. His more or less number is 222.5 against Wisconsin this week. Wisconsin does have a pretty good defense. They're ranked 8th in the nation against the pass, giving up just 161 yards a game. And Purdue also, they haven't beaten Wisco since 2003. So how do you feel about Aiden O'Connell this week?
Yeah, that's an interesting number because it definitely shows a lot of respect for the matchup with Wisconsin, the way they play defense. But I think Purdue kind of has a unique style compared to the rest of the Big Ten, where you can take away their run game and they don't really care. And I think that with that in mind, obviously Wisconsin really good against the run, in addition to being really good against the pass, like that all factors in. But at the same time, it hurts Purdue a little bit less. I think Purdue, just their kind of MO is to drop back and let it rip. So I think that we're going to see Purdue have a really, really heavy pass to run split in this one. And I think that just based on the volume and who David Bell is as a receiver, obviously he's been crushing it when healthy this season, or really the last few seasons. I think we see Bell push for, 10, 12 targets and, almost get O'Connell halfway there, if not more, just by himself. And I think that O'Connell throws enough passes the rest of the way, completes enough of them to get him over this 225. So or 222. So I like the more on O'Connell. It might be one you got to sweat it out a little bit, but in the end, Purdue they throw the ball so much. I got to lean with the more.
I like the more as well. And I would love to see Purdue go and beat Wisconsin as well, since they haven't done it in 18 years. Last guy here on our nice little noon slate would be Syracuse's running back, Sean Tucker. 132.5 is his more or less total. This dude is just quietly a bell cow, I guess is the only way to put it, at or more than 132 yards in 5 out of 7 games this season. He's been over 150 in each of the last 2 weeks. Syracuse, they're not winning these games, but Tucker's still performing. He's been named the ACC running back of the week for 2 straight weeks now. He's second in the country in rushing behind Kenneth Walker at Michigan State. And they're playing a Virginia Tech team that just isn't very good. They're allowing 151 yards per game on the ground. I like the more here for Tucker. How do you feel?
Yeah, this is one where that number is so high that I tend to just feel like taking the less is the right play. But in Tucker's case, like you mentioned, that workload is amazing. I mean, he's pushing over 20 carries per game. You can't say that about a ton of guys in college football this season, just a real bell cow. And in addition to that, he's extremely effective with it on a per carry basis. And Virginia Tech, that they are far less of a defense than what Clemson was a week ago. And Tucker goes ahead and runs for almost 160 yards on them on 7 yards per carry. And he also ran for over 150 on Wake Forest. And that's a defense that flies around a good bit as well. So even with this one being on the road and who Syracuse has a quarterback and Garrett Schrader, they're not going to ask him to put the ball in the air too much. Schrader runs a decent bit, so that could be somewhat of a factor here. But I think that Tucker, the game plan, the bread and butter for the Orange right now is just to feed Tucker. And I think with that in mind, the more of 132.5 is definitely my call here as well.
And I think I saw Tucker is also tied for the Syracuse record of 5 straight 100-yard rushing games. And when you think about like just the great running backs that Syracuse has had over the years between Jim Brown, Ernie Davis, those guys, I mean, it's pretty impressive company to be in. And he could very well break that record this week, which, I mean, if we're going by our picks, it sounds like he's going to. So
do we have a special sound for when an Ernie Davis reference is dropped on the show?
Yeah, do we?
Well, we can get the soundboard going. This is a lesson learned. We need more sounds, so we'll work on that for next week.
All right, beautiful. Very good. By week 9, we'll have sounds going. Very good. Little sound drops and effects. Moving on to the late afternoon slate, 3:30 Eastern kickoff is when these start. Not all of these games start, I believe, right at that time. Some of them start in the 4 o'clock window, but your slates will lock in around 3:30. So make sure you get those in there on Saturday. And we'll start with Matt Corral, 299.5. Passing yards is his more or less total against LSU this week. I mean, Corral had a monster game last week, escaping Knoxville with a win. That hostile environment, they're throwing things on the field. Those Tennessee fans there. I mean, it's a crazy, absolutely crazy game. But I really liked the moment before the game when Lane Kiffin's doing his little pregame sideline interview, and the reporter asks him, what makes you so confident coming back here? And he just smiled and goes, Matt Corral. And I mean, that's a pretty good reason to feel confident. The dude, he almost ran for 200 yards last week. I think he had 30 carries for 195. He's paying the price a little bit. He is a little banged up and kind of hurt, but he is expected to play this weekend against LSU at home, a much less hostile environment being at home for Ole Miss. And LSU is giving up about 248 yards per game through the air. And I'm not really sure what to expect out of this LSU team now with Coach L on his farewell tour. John, what can we expect out of LSU on defense this week against Corral?
Right. And we talked about last week with LSU that they have no Derek Stingley, no Kerry Vincent, or Eli Ricks, I'm sorry. Vincent already in the NFL, I think. So that secondary is gettable. But I'm a little bit worried that LSU has found a little bit of something with its run game, and I think you can definitely run the ball on Ole Miss. We've seen that time and time again throughout the course of this year. So I think that LSU is going to kind of go with that approach with Davis Price back there and play kind of a ball control game in a way that they hadn't been previously. So that's going to limit the possessions and the play count, I think, a little bit in Corral's favor. And I think Corral, being dinged up as he is, I hate to say it because that guy is such a rock star, but I got to go with less here.
Yeah, I mean, he's paying the price for carrying the ball 30 times last week and then dropping back, I think, over 30 as well. So he got beat up in that Tennessee game. And yeah, 299, just a little bit too high for me, especially with the way Ole Miss has been playing, where it's just like they're going to try to hang on and bleed clock, and they might have to run the ball here and to get out of here with a win on Saturday. So next up, we got, hang on, I got to find this guy's name.
By the way,
we're going Les. Next quarterback we got is Jaden DeLora, Washington State, taking on BYU, 283.5. He's thrown for over 283 in 3 of 6 this season, including the last 2 weeks when they beat both Oregon State and Stanford. BYU is giving up about 237 yards per game through the air, but Washington State, a little bit of turmoil there. Nick Rolovich was fired this week. He refused to get vaccinated due to the state mandate, and he was the highest paid state employee, so he is no longer with the university. The team has won 3 in a row, but multiple players, including DeLora, voicing their frustrations and are not happy with the university's decision, and 4 assistant coaches as well were let go. So is this something that could derail this team against BYU this weekend? What do you think out of DeLora?
Yeah, this is really tricky. That's obviously a very kind of sensitive situation that they got going out in Pullman. BYU pretty decent against the pass, nothing spectacular or anything, but I'm wondering what exactly fueled Washington State throwing fewer than 40 passes last week. I think that must have had something to do more with Stanford playing a ball control style and Washington State maybe not having that much time with possession. BYU can do kind of similar things to that Stanford can as far as that goes, and they can extend possessions further because they're a little bit more talented than Stanford on offense. So I think we could see a relatively lower passing volume from Delora this week. And I think that he gets slowed down a little bit. And I think all the distractions going around it in Pullman is enough to make me go with the less on Delora.
Yeah, I'm going to go less too. Just a lot of stuff surrounding that Cougars program that I just don't want to go anywhere near and depend on them. I mean, especially if you got multiple players mad, multiple assistant coaches out, the head coach is gone. It just seems like a recipe for kind of a disaster on Saturday against BYU. Moving on to our wide receiver here in this prop, it's Chris Autman-Bell of Minnesota, the Golden Gophers. His prop is 3.5 receptions. Last week, he balled out against Nebraska with 11. Before that, he hadn't had a week with more than 4 catches since middle of September. So what are we expecting out of the Golden Gophers offense and Autman-Bell this week?
Right. So Autman-Bell is a guy, he was never going to be quite the Tyler Johnson or the Rashad Bateman, but he was supposed to be the next man up. And he came into the year banged up. I think he had an ankle, didn't really play much, if at all, against Ohio State in that opener, and obviously had that slow start to the season, but he seems to be good to go now. And I think that with that in mind, he's going to be pushing for double-digit targets pretty much every week from here on out, that he's able to stay on the field the entire time. And Maryland's defense seems to have fallen flat over those last couple of weeks. I think that the demoralizing losses to Iowa and Ohio State, even with Maryland coming off the bye, I don't know if they necessarily have an answer for Autman-Bell. And then, even though Minnesota has lost its running backs as well, they still have guys. They still have Bryce Williams, and they still have a stable of other freshman running backs. So it's going to be hard for Maryland to focus on taking any one thing away from this Minnesota balanced offense. And I think that also at the end of the day, the big thing that I mentioned was the target volume for Autman-Bell. So over or more than 3.5, I feel like it is one of my favorite plays from this quartet of bets here.
All right. And let's get to one of my favorite plays, and that'd be Jalen Warren versus Iowa State. 120.5 is his more or less 4 straight weeks over 120 yards on the ground for Warren, including 193 against Texas last week. I mean, you feed this guy, he delivers. Look at these carries. I mean, 32 against Boise State, 27 versus Kansas State, 36 against Baylor, and then 33 last week. He is an absolute bell cow, a monster. And for all the love that we give Bijan Robinson, this is the hottest running back in the Big 12 right now, but he's going up against a very good run defense in Iowa State. They're 15th ranked in the country, giving up just 97 yards per game, and overall a very good defense that could spell some trouble for the Oklahoma State Cowboys. So what do you expect out of Warren? I think he's going to go over this just for the volume alone.
Yep, I think you have it right, but where the volume ends up being king, because, Iowa State also only gives up 2.8 yards per carry. That's really, really tough to contend with, but it just doesn't feel like Oklahoma State is interested in going away from him, even if he's not ripping off 5-6 yards per carry. Like, they're still going to continue to feed him. And I think a lot of that has to do with Spencer Sanders, kind of taking a step back, and Oklahoma State not being that prolific through the air. So Warren just kind of is the engine of that entire offense. They're going to have to go into Ames this week. Iowa State obviously kind of took themselves out of the picture early this season, but there's a reason that they're favored at the books this week. And I think that the best way for Oklahoma State to attack them is to take the crowd out of the game by getting the run rolling. And I think Warren is going to be a huge part of that. So he gets 30 carries, he's getting 120. And there's very good reason to believe he's getting 30 carries or more this week. So I'm with you there on the more with Warren.
For what it's worth, 41 carries at 2.8 yards will get you to 121 yards.
There it is.
So there it is.
Look at that. We said we weren't going to do math anymore on this show, but that's good math.
What the heck?
That's good math. Anyways, but John, I did want to ask you. So Oklahoma State, they're number 9 in the country. They're undefeated. They're coming off a big win at Texas. they're still 7-point dogs this week on the road against an Iowa State team that just hasn't been able to put everything together. I mean, what's with the disrespect for Oklahoma State? Is it just because of Spencer Sanders taking a step back?
I think that has to be the big thing, because they do continue to win. They've notched some really quality wins so far. Nothing that will bowl you over. And maybe we won't really know until Bedlam against Oklahoma later on in the season what Oklahoma State really is. But they're just a tough team. It's very strange. They're not that high flying Oklahoma State that we've seen in years past. Certainly not befitting of Mike Gundy, but they just get the job done. And I guess, again, when it comes to the disrespect of them being an undefeated top 10 team that is this heavily of underdogs on the road, I think it comes down with Sanders not being all that great this year, the receivers, and then also Iowa State. They are starting to play a little bit better. They kind of took themselves off the national radar with the way that the season started for them, but I think they are starting to play a little bit better. And Ames is a tough place to win. We saw it with Oklahoma last year.
Very good. Very good. There is a 3:30 game this weekend that I do want to talk about, and that's UCLA and Oregon. We haven't really talked much Pac-12 on this show since the season started. I mean, there really hasn't been much of a reason to, outside of Oregon's big win against Ohio State back in week 2. But this is an interesting spot for the Ducks. They've been struggling, and now they're going to head down to Pasadena and take on UCLA against Chip Kelly and the Bruins there for UCLA. So let's talk about the quarterbacks here. Dorian Thompson-Robinson of UCLA, his more or less number is 215.5. He's hit that in 4 of 7 games this season, but he's cooled off big time the last 2 weeks, finishing with just 183 yards last weekend against Washington. Oregon's defense, not great. They're giving up 270 yards per game, and their defense, especially their pass defense, is one of the reasons why you see a lot of people are moving off them when it comes to their playoff chances. So what do you expect out of UCLA's passing offense this week?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Oregon is really not playing well in the secondary right now. And, they really did everything they could to give that game to Cal a week ago. That was a wild game on Friday night, and Cal almost pulled it off. So this is a tricky one, because you have 2 quarterbacks that haven't been lighting it up through the air necessarily against 2 secondaries that have been giving up massive yardage. I mean, UCLA, their pass defense even worse than what Oregon's is right now. I think they're giving up like 290 passing yards per game. So the avenues will be there for passing yards, but I'm not sure if either quarterback will be able to truly take advantage. So when it comes to Thompson-Robinson specifically, I would take the less. I think that UCLA, like, maybe they'll get Thompson-Robinson going a little bit more on the ground, Charbonnet and Britton Brown, those type of guys. And I think that we see a lower passing volume from UCLA this week. Like you mentioned, he's cooled off a good bit. As for Anthony Brown, he's such a tricky guy, because he's that dual threat guy as well. But I think when you have Oregon going without CJ Verdell, and you have a matchup where UCLA is giving up this much through the air, I think they at least test it out. And I think that there will be enough times where Oregon trusts to put the ball in Anthony Brown's hands, let him create something through the air to where more than 202.5, it would be my lean.
Yeah, so I like that more there too. As you mentioned, so UCLA, they're ranked 122nd in the country. They're giving up 290 yards per game through the air. Louisville is the only Power 5 school giving up more. And I mean, we've seen the calls for Brown to be benched have been coming here in the last couple of weeks, but they're still sticking with him. I thought he had a very good game passing wise last week against Cal, 20 of 28, 244. I mean, that's pretty much as good as you're going to get from him. And I think he can do something close to that again this week against UCLA. So I like the more there as well. And another reason I wanted to bring up this game is because we haven't had a mustache of the week in a while. So here we go. Aaron Feld, look at that. Oh, I can see you're already flexing your mustache. I mean, Aaron Feld was, of course, he burst onto the scene when he was the assistant strength coach at Georgia a couple of years ago in that national championship game. Everybody was just mesmerized by that beautiful mustache. And he heads to Oregon to team up with his old friend there, Mario Cristobal, and the Ducks. So make your case. Do you have a better stash than Aaron Feld?
I think I do, because I don't need wax and other tricks of the trade to have people call out my mustache like that. it's a wild look, and it's awesome in its own right, but it's a try hard look, and that's not what I go for. If I really wanted to just stop trimming the sides and do that, like I could achieve that fairly easily. And you know what, frankly, in my budget right now, I'm not spending on mustache wax. So I'm just not going to do that. I'm just going to go au natural with it. So he's all showy. He's all hat and no cattle. I need more substance. He's trying to draw attention away from the real thing in the middle there. So I think I have a better mustache than the former UGA strength coach.
We can send you some premium mustache wax. I mean, that's fine.
We get a sponsor. We got. Can we work on getting a sponsor?
We work on a sponsor too, if we'd like.
Now, okay. Then I retract everything, and I'm like the biggest mustache wax aficionado ever.
I love it. Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned try hard, because when this guy kind of burst on the scene a couple of years ago, it also brought something else on the scene to a lot of people. And that was the get back coach. I think the Georgia coach there, was it Steve Stricker? Is that his name, or Strickland? Something like that is the Georgia coach that was holding, like trying to wrangle.
Oh, Kirby. Scott Strickland. There we go. Yeah. Not even going to bother learning his name, but anyways, it just bugs me when you see these coaches that they have no spatial awareness, that they need someone to wrangle them like a toddler and pull them back in. I mean, Brent Venables, the defensive coordinator from Clemson, was one of the first guys that had that. He's got someone like, grabbing him by the hips there, and they're doing some weird little, it just drives me nuts. I mean, you're so buried into your play sheet, like it's, a takeout Chinese menu, that you can't realize where you are. Sean McVay too. Win something before you have a get back coach. That's all I got to say. Waddy, this is a tremendous rant from you. I couldn't agree more. The get back coaches are just an absurd advent. Adult men should be fully cognizant of where they are while coaching a football game. You can be intense while also knowing where to stand. It can't be that hard.
Thank you. I mean, Nick Saban doesn't need one. Belichick doesn't need one, but for some reason these guys do, and it just bugs me. I mean, if that's why we're paying the strength coaches to just hold these coaches back, it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous to me. So, anyways, moving on. Let's head to the night games. We got some fun main slate games. And speaking of Nick Saban, his Crimson Tide, they're back. I mean, as we expected, they just put an absolute beat down on Mississippi State last week. 49-9 was the final score there. This week, they're taking on Tennessee. They're back at home finally after those two road games. Bryce Young, 299.5. And I got to think Bryce Young sees what Matt Corral did against these guys, and he's kind of got to one-up them if he's paying attention to that Heisman race at all, because these two are the co-favorites right now. So I think he's got to answer Corral a little bit here. But is that 299.5 too high for you, John?
Yeah, this is tricky because, so Bama could just do what they did against Ole Miss, right? And just kind of take the air out of the ball and just bludgeon them with Brian Robinson, who we'll get to in a minute. But, when it comes to Young, yeah, if he's got like the Heisman hopeful still going, and he obviously does, I think that they're going to need to put the ball in the air, and he's thrown for well over 300 yards in the last 2 weeks and 3 of the last 4. So Tennessee can definitely give it up through the air. And if Tennessee has any pulse on offense, if Hendon Hooker is healthy enough to go and Tennessee's running 80 plays or whatever it is at that max tempo, then I think that Alabama has to answer and keep up on the scoreboard a little bit. And, we do see Bama checking in as 4 touchdown favorites. So there's a lot of expectation that Bama's going to score a lot. And I think all of that combined, I will take the more. I think we see Bryce Young hit that 300-yard clip again.
Yeah, I mean, the one problem I have with this game is just this game could be over with by halftime. That's my big problem here. I mean, the Crimson Tide finally getting back home to Tuscaloosa. I think they're just going to, and they have to put up style points here up until this SEC championship game and keep running the table here if they want any shot of repeating as national champs. So next guy, as you mentioned, the running back there, Brian Robinson Jr., 90.5 is his total. After 2 weeks of over 145, he comes back down to earth a little bit against Mississippi State, only finishing with 73 yards on the ground. He did contribute in the passing game with 5 catches for 68 yards. But this Tennessee run defense, they're giving up about 136 yards per game on the ground. So how do you feel about Robinson's total there?
I really like Robinson. I just don't think they have a ton of depth behind him in that backfield. With Jace McClellan being out for the season and the freshman Kamar Wheaton having not played yet, so it is the Robinson show in that backfield, more or less. So I like him to cross this 90.5 threshold against Tennessee, because I think at a certain point we will see Alabama up by enough. Again, with the spread here, we're expecting Bama to have a comfortable lead late in this game, and I think that they end up running it out with Robinson. So and I know I'm kind of calling on two distinct things happening with Bryce Young having a big game through the air and Brian Robinson having a big game on the ground. But this is Alabama we're talking about. We've seen them be able to fuel several massive performances before, and I think that this is another weekend where it happens.
Just say Roll Tide, John. Just say Roll Tide. I know you
Can't
want
do it. Can't do it.
I know you want to. You're kind of tiptoeing around it. You're saying it without saying it. The last guy here we got is Jamison Williams, 89.5 receiving yards is his more or less. And John, when I look at this one, it just feels a little too high to me because the volume share is just not there for him. I mean, 2 weeks ago against Texas A&M, he has 10 receptions, but before that, it's just, four catches, 3 catches, 5 catches, 2 catches last week against Mississippi State. I just feel like he's just not going to have the ball in his hands enough to get that number.
I tend to agree with you. I mean, they have such a deep group of receivers. Like Williams, it is sort of like a lesser extent what they had a couple of years ago, where you never knew if it was Judy week or if it was Devontae Smith week or if it was Ruggs week. Bama can just kind of pick their poison. Again, it's not to that same extent, and John Mechie hasn't been maybe quite as explosive as we were expecting coming into this year. But I think it's a little bit much to ask of Jamison Williams to hit that number. I still can't believe that they found him on the transfer portal, like save some for the rest of us. But I would go with the less here. I think they spread the ball out a little bit more this week. They have the ability to do so against this Tennessee secondary, and I think they will. So I don't think that Williams ends up seeing that requisite volume to get there.
Yeah, and then the last game here, let's just quickly talk about USC Notre Dame, which used to be, and when these two schools are at their height, this is one of the best rivalries in college football. But right now, USC is just such a disaster, and I mean Notre Dame, they're nothing great. But they're in a better position than USC right now. So you got Keaton Slovis, 267.5 is his more or less. I'm going to go with more here just because I just watching Notre Dame this year. The other team just seems to hang in it the entire time. And I think the only way USC is going to do that is with Slovis throwing a lot to Drake London, especially too.
Yes. If there is a Drake London prop for this week, I'd like to see it, because there's a very real chance he pushes for like 20 targets this week. But when it comes to Slovis, a 267.5 number, I do have to go less, and I think it's just more of a statement on how I feel about this USC team. I think that they're just kind of a mess right now. We could see kind of a miserable weather day in South Bend. So I think that if that pass rush gets home for Notre Dame, we see Slovis get rattled. I don't know if the backup Jackson Dart is going to be fully healthy to play, but if he is, I've got to feel like that leash is short for Slovis. So I would go with the less on 267.5.
Jackson Dart is such a fantastic name for him.
Oh yeah. He's from like Iowa or Kansas or something, but just the name alone, I think, put him on USC's radar.
Love it. And then speaking of guys with short leases, that's Jack Cohn in a nutshell. This guy the number is 177.5, but I'm going less here just because I think we're going to see Tyler Buckner before this game's over. And we might see Jack Cohn come back in at the end, which we've seen before here with this Notre Dame team, as they had to do that against Virginia Tech 2 weeks ago to pull out the win in Blacksburg. So I'm going less here just because I don't think he's going to throw the ball enough.
Couldn't agree more. If he starts out slow, Kelly has obviously showed no hesitance to pull him if necessary, and Buckner should be healthy. I believe Notre Dame's coming off a bye. And even if Buckner isn't fully ready, Drew Pine can certainly, make it work. He did against Wisconsin. So, I don't think that this is a good setup for Cohn, even with that low number.
All right. Anybody else on this entire smorgasbord that we got going on here that you like?
If you want a little Friday action, which you may, specifically some late night Friday, take a look at that Utah State, Colorado State game. There's Logan Bonner sitting there at 253.5. That Utah State occasionally does a little bit of a 2 QB situation there, but Bonner's the guy that they trust to throw it. And Utah State has one of the best kept secrets at receiver in the country, and Devin Tompkins. And I think that you have that combined with the fact that Colorado State, maybe not as bad as they were early on in the season, but they're still a very, very bad team. And I think that Bonner ends up throwing it enough to hit over that 253 number.
All right. I love it. And then last question I got for you. I started off the show with it, but let's anybody on Saturday on upset watch here?
I think that this is one of those weeks where I think it's going to be really chalky. I would have said Alabama would have been if Tennessee was going fully healthy into this game and maybe coming off of the win against Ole Miss, but with Hendon Hooker being dinged up and with them coming off the loss, I think that's much less likely to happen. So unfortunately, I think we're going to see a fairly chalky week where these upper tier teams survive. I guess the only one that you could really think about would be Penn State, but they're coming off the bye, and I think Sean Clifford returned to practice. If it is Roberson back there at quarterback, then maybe Illinois has a prayer. But if Clifford's back there, then Penn State takes care of business pretty easily.
All right, fair enough.
Navy midshipmen.
I would love to see Cincinnati
taking it down.
That'd be great. I would love to see Cincinnati get beat. But anyways, thanks, guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing to our wonderful YouTube channel. We'll be back next week with a monster slate again, a couple top 10 matchups as of right now, as long as no one gets beat this weekend in the Big Ten. You got some great SEC battles as well. We'll break all those down for you next week. But John, where can they follow you?
You can find me on Twitter at Johns_tailgate, tweeting a bunch of nonsense at pretty much all times. So follow me on over there. And if you want to find my work, rotowire.com/cfootball. Write articles every single week, and I'm in charge of our rankings and our projections. So if I'm wrong on stuff, you can let me know about it at John's Tailgate on Twitter.
Love it. And you can follow me at Dan Watkins Radio. And once again, if there's any mustache wax companies out there, we're willing to work with you. Please come sponsor us. We'd love it. All right, guys. Thanks for watching, and have fun watching football.